Sometimes the message is repeated. My mother used to realize that quite often when she was saying things to me, I was walking away. And quite often my mother would be standing up, waiting for me to come back in the room so she could say exactly the same thing when I was facing her. And one of my girlfriends who was complaining to my mother about me for some reason, which of course immediately put her on the list as far as I was concerned, my mother said to her, "Don't waste any subtleties on him. He doesn't get it." I'm not sure, but I think that was a shot. Sometimes the message is repeated, and then we hear it. We get another chance, especially important messages. To miss something important, however, the second time or the third time gets to be a scary proposition. It gets to say a lot about who we are. And when "did not notice" as our label turns into "never notice," we are in big trouble. I never noticed that. I can't believe you didn't notice. Over and over again, and you never noticed. This week I bought a book called The Hole in the Gospel. I'd read a couple of articles about this book, and I finally bought the book. And I have to tell you, it's a very disturbing book for me. It's a hopeful book and a helpful book, but it's also very disturbing. To be, after 39 years in the ministry, to have this book expose so much of what the church as a whole in the world has not done is painful. And, you know, I had a friend of mine who left the ministry, and he said, if I ever went back into the ministry, the only place I would go would be to the Salvation Army, because they know what they're doing. I thought about that, still think about it. Anyway, this book is The Hole in the Gospel, is written by a man named Richard Stearns, who was for many, many years a CEO of major corporations. Lenox China was the last place he was the CEO. Made lots of money, had all those perks that CEOs get that we read about and say, oh, that's just awful. I could live on that for 10, 15 years or more. And he was one of those. Until he realized he wasn't noticing a lot of what was going on. And that, in fact, the gospel that he believed and that he went to church to hear, and the gospel that he thought he was living, had a huge hole in it regarding people in this world who have nothing. And so he left there and he became the president of World Vision. We've talked about World Vision. It's an international, very large missionary organization, very well managed, very well run. And when we do projects and send money to World Vision, as many churches do, we know that money is well spent. And so I was thinking about this hole in the gospel, and that's why I passed out these yellow pages. And so if you didn't get one of these yellow pages passed down to you, you should have one of these in your hand right now. This was one of the pages in the book that was instructive and disturbing at the same time. Because these surveys, you know, and we say, well, what do people think about the church, and what influence does the church have in the world? I remember being turned down for a job at a church one time, the pastor's job, because they said, we're not sure that you're the kind of guy that can go into the city and get an audience with the mayor and have some influence on the way the city is run. And that comment kind of shook me because, and finally I laughed, as you know, which canceled my chance of getting that job in any ways at all. And I said, do you really believe ministers have influence with mayors of cities nowadays? What are you thinking? And then I said goodbye and left. People have ideas about church life that are absolutely not true. And so when I saw this struggle of young churchgoers article, I wanted to share this with you because I thought we've got to know this kind of stuff. We're the church here. Do we know what we're doing? Then we know how people feel about us. And how many times have you said it or heard it said, well, you know, youth are the future of the church? Any of you who have had long church experience have said that and heard that many times. Youth are the future of the church. Here are the youth. Indicate what you think of present-day Christianity, meaning, of course, the church as well. What do you think? Among Americans 16 to 29, outsiders who are not church people said, well, the church is anti-homosexual. 91% of them said that. Now, we have different views of that in this room. It's not 100% in any direction about our feelings about this. There are lots of different opinions in this room. Churchgoers believe that 80%. A churchgoer said 80% believe the church is anti-homosexual. Even churches that openly accept people are sometimes judged that way. Is the church and Christianity judgmental? Outsiders say 87%. Oh, yes, it's very judgmental. 52% of our own people say it's judgmental, our own young people. Hypocritical. 85% of outsiders, not surprising, but 47% of our own people. Old-fashioned. Well, I've talked about that. Too involved in politics. 75% of outsiders, 50% of churchgoers. You know, among the evangelical churches, I wanted to tell you this, which really took on the political mantle for a long time, Jerry Falwell and Robertson being the main carriers of that. Those evangelical churches have changed and turned around. And two major, huge evangelical churches fired their pastors because they said, all we hear from you is anti-gay, anti-abortion, prayer in the schools. That's not what we're about. We're about many, many things. The gospel is a big gospel. And so you need to be done. It was a shock, not only to the churches and to the pastors, but to the evangelical community. There was too much politics and too much one-sided politics as well. Out of touch with reality, 32% of our own people believe that. One young person said, and it was quoted as part of a survey, the church doesn't look like Jesus. Insensitive to others, boring, not accepting other faiths, 39%. Confusing, 44% of our own young people feel that the church is confusing. Why are they confused? Because they hear the gospel, and then what they see doesn't seem to line up. There's a disconnect there. There's something missing. And that's why they're saying they're confused. One man got up, this man, Richard Stearns, who wrote this book, in fact, got up. They had a big mission conference in his church. He belongs to a very large church. And they were trying to raise $700,000 for missions. They were trying to raise $700,000. All the pledges came in, they raised $600,000. Now at Chaffin Church, if we could raise $600,000, we would be so happy, we wouldn't even know what to do with ourselves. But this was a big, huge church, thousands of people. So Stearns got up and said, we're $100,000 short. He was called on for a moment by the senior pastor. And he stood up and he said, we're $100,000 short. $100,000 in this congregation. Look around you. Look at the cars in the parking lot. We could come up with that $100,000. I ask you to rethink your pledge. And after that worship service, they had $110,000 more pledged. And the senior pastor said to him, you took a lot of time, you know. Our services are timed pretty much down to the minute. You took a lot of time. You know, sometimes don't you get the urge to just slap somebody? I mean, it's not a very Christian thing to do, but you look at the person and you say, what the heck? It's unbelievable. So when you look at a list like these young people, that would be one of the confusing things. The man stood up and said, we've got to raise it. We've got a lot of things to do, and we want to do these things, and we believe that God is calling us. The number one thing,